Did you know there's a country so vast it spans 11 time zones, where the Hermitage Museum would take 11 years to view every exhibit, and where women are so beautiful they've dominated international beauty pageants for decades? Smash that subscribe button right now, because I'm about to reveal mind-blowing secrets about Russia that will completely change everything you thought you knew about the world's largest nation, including why Russian culture has produced some of humanity's greatest artists, writers, and composers, and how a country that's bridged Europe and Asia for centuries continues to fascinate and perplex the entire world. Russia, that colossal nation stretching across 2 continents from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean, is a land of extremes and contradictions where over 144 million people inhabit the largest country on Earth, covering more than 17 million square kilometers. This is a nation where Moscow's Golden Domes and St. Petersburg's imperial palaces showcase European grandeur, while Siberian wilderness extends for thousands of kilometers with forests, tundra, and landscapes so remote they seem untouched since the Ice Age. Russia is where East meets West, where authoritarian tradition clashes with desires for freedom, where Orthodox spirituality coexists with Soviet atheist legacy, and where a proud people with turbulent history continue to see themselves as a great civilization with unique mission in the world. Russian history is epic in scale and often tragic in its human cost. The story begins with the Kievan Rus, the first East Slavic state founded in the 9th century with its capital in Kiev, now Ukraine. This state adopted Orthodox Christianity from Byzantium in 988 under Prince Vladimir, a decision that would shape Russian identity for over a millennium. The Mongol invasion of the 13th century devastated the Rus lands, and for over 2 centuries, Russian principalities paid tribute to Mongol Khans. A period of subjugation that profoundly affected Russian political culture and contributed to the development of autocratic governance patterns. The rise of Muscovy and the eventual throwing off of Mongol rule by Ivan III in the 15th century began Russia's transformation into an empire. Ivan IV, known as Ivan the Terrible, was the first Russian ruler to crown himself Tsar, expanding Russian territory dramatically while also establishing patterns of absolute power and brutal repression that would characterize much of Russian governance for centuries. The Romanov dynasty, beginning in 1613, ruled Russia for over 300 years, transforming it from a relatively backward state into a major European power. Peter the Great in the early 18th century forcibly modernized Russia, building St. Petersburg as a window to Europe, requiring nobles to adopt Western dress and customs, and creating a powerful navy and modern army. His transformation was achieved through brutal methods but made Russia a force that European powers had to respect. Catherine the Great continued the expansion, bringing much of modern Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland under Russian control, and fostering a golden age of culture with patronage of arts and education. Though this enlightenment didn't extend to the serfs who remained essentially slaves until 1861. The 19th century saw Russia produce arguably the greatest literary tradition in world history. Tolstoy's War and Peace, and Anna Karenina, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and the Brothers Karamazov, Chekhov's plays and short stories, Pushkin's poetry, Gogol's surreal tales, and Turgenev's novels represent achievements in literature that few nations can match. These works explored questions of morality, suffering, redemption, the nature of Russian soul, and the conflict between Western ideas and Russian traditions with depth and artistry that continues to resonate. Russian composers like Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, Stravinsky, and Mussorgsky created music that defined romantic and modern classical traditions. Russian ballet became the gold standard worldwide, with companies like the Bolshoi and Mariinsky producing dancers and choreographers who revolutionized the art form. The Russian Revolution of 1917 was one of the most consequential events of the 20th century. Years of war, famine, and resentment of the Tsarist autocracy exploded into revolution that ultimately brought the Bolsheviks and Vladimir Lenin to power. What followed was an experiment in communist governance that would last 74 years and influence the entire world. The Soviet period brought industrialization at breakneck and brutal pace, universal literacy and education, victory over Nazi Germany at enormous human cost, achievement of superpower status with nuclear weapons and space program, but also totalitarian repression, purges that killed millions, forced collectivization causing famines, labor camps housing millions of prisoners, and a command economy that ultimately couldn't compete with market systems. Stalin's rule from the late 1920s to 1953 was particularly brutal, with estimates of deaths caused by his policies ranging from 6 to 20 million or more through purges, forced famines like the Holodomor in Ukraine, labor camps, executions, and deliberate policies of terror designed to eliminate any potential opposition. The Great Purge of the late 1930s saw millions arrested, hundreds of thousands executed, and an atmosphere of paranoia where anyone could be denounced and disappeared. Yet Stalin also led the Soviet Union to victory in what Russians call the Great Patriotic War against Nazi Germany, a conflict that cost the Soviet Union approximately 27 million lives, more than any other nation, and left deep scars on Russian national consciousness. Every Russian family lost someone in that war, and Victory Day on May 9th remains the most important national holiday, when Russians honor the sacrifice that saved their nation from Nazi extermination plans. The Cold War defined the second half of the 20th century, with the Soviet Union and United States locked in ideological, political, and military competition that brought the world repeatedly to the brink of nuclear war. The space race saw the Soviets achieve remarkable firsts, including first satellite, first man and woman in space, and first spacewalk, demonstrating technological capabilities that challenged American supremacy. However, by the 1980s, the Soviet system was stagnating economically and losing legitimacy. Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms of glasnost and perestroika, intended to save the system by making it more open and efficient, instead unleashed forces that tore the Soviet Union apart. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the liberation of Eastern European states from Soviet control, and finally, the dissolution of the Soviet Union itself in 1991 marked one of the most dramatic, peaceful transformations in history. The 1990s were chaotic years for Russia, with economic collapse, hyperinflation, the rise of oligarchs who bought state assets for pennies, declining life expectancy, and a sense of national humiliation as a former superpower struggled to feed its people. The rise of Vladimir Putin from relative obscurity to president in 2000 coincided with rising oil prices that brought economic recovery and restoration of state power. Putin's rule, whether as president or prime minister, has lasted over 2 decades and consolidated authoritarian control while overseeing economic growth, restoration of Russian military power, and increasingly assertive foreign policy that challenges Western dominance. The relationship between Russia and the West has deteriorated dramatically, particularly after the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine that escalated to full invasion in 2022. Actions that have led to unprecedented sanctions and Russia's isolation from much of the Western world. Russian women are world famous for their beauty and have dominated international beauty pageants disproportionately for decades. With typically tall, slender figures, high cheekbones, expressive eyes ranging from blue to green to brown, fair to olive skin, and hair from blonde to dark brown, Russian women embody a Slavic beauty ideal. But their appeal goes far beyond physical attributes. Russian women are known for their femininity, taking great pride in appearance even for mundane activities, with high heels, dresses, and full makeup common for grocery shopping. This isn't insecurity, but cultural value placed on maintaining feminine presentation. Russian women are also highly educated, with more women holding university degrees than men. And despite traditional gender roles in some aspects, Russian women have long participated fully in workforce, a legacy of Soviet policies. Russian women value family intensely. are known for being excellent, cooks maintaining elaborate food traditions, and are fiercely loyal to loved ones. In relationships, they appreciate traditional gender dynamics where men are expected to pursue, pay for dates, and demonstrate chivalry. But they also expect to be treated with respect and valued as intellectual equals. The combination of striking beauty, strong family values, education, and traditional femininity makes Russian women highly sought after internationally. Russian culture places enormous emphasis on suffering and endurance as paths to spiritual depth. The concept of the Russian soul, a belief that Russians experience emotions more deeply and possess spiritual wisdom earned through suffering, pervades literature, philosophy, and self-conception. This may partly explain the stoicism with which Russians have endured hardships throughout history, from Mongol occupation to Tsarist oppression to Soviet terror to economic chaos. There's a famous saying that Russians are pessimists who are never disappointed, reflecting the dark humor and expectation that things will probably go wrong that characterizes much of Russian worldview. Russian cuisine is hearty and designed for cold climate. Borscht, the famous beet soup served with sour cream, comes in many regional variations. Pelmeni, meat dumplings, are comfort food eaten by everyone from students to oligarchs. Blini, thin pancakes served with caviar, sour cream, or sweet toppings, are traditional for Maslenitsa festival before Lent. May beef stroganoff, chicken Kiev, and various meat dishes showcase hearty Russian cooking. Zakuski, elaborate spreads of appetizers, including pickled vegetables, smoked fish, cold meats, and salads, accompany vodka drinking. Vodka itself is central to Russian culture, consumed in shots accompanied by toasts at gatherings that can last for hours with multiple courses and endless rounds of toasting. To health, friendship, loved ones, and various other subjects with increasing creativity as the night progresses. Moscow, the capital, is a city of dramatic contrasts where Red Square and the Kremlin represent centuries of Russian power, where Stalin-era skyscrapers called the Seven Sisters dominate the skyline, where Orthodox churches with golden onion domes stand alongside Soviet monuments and ultra-modern skyscrapers. The Moscow metro is famous for its palatial stations decorated with mosaics, sculptures, and chandeliers, built as palaces for the people showcasing Soviet artistic ambition. Modern Moscow is a city of wealth with luxury shops, expensive cars, and nightlife that rivals any major city, but also one where inequality is stark and many struggle economically. St. Petersburg, founded by Peter the Great in 1703, is Russia's most European city with architecture rivaling Paris or Vienna. The Hermitage Museum, housed in the Winter Palace, contains over 3 million works of art, one of the world's greatest collections. The city's canals, Baroque palaces, and imperial grandeur earned it the nickname Venice of the North. During World War II, then called Leningrad, the city endured a 900-day siege by German forces that killed over 1 million people through starvation, cold, and bombardment. Yet the city never surrendered, becoming a symbol of Soviet resistance and sacrifice. The Russian language is beautiful and complex, with 6 grammatical cases, 3 genders, aspect system for verbs, and Cyrillic alphabet. Russian literature's greatness is inseparable from the language's expressiveness and ability to convey subtle emotional and philosophical nuances. Learning Russian is challenging, but opens access to cultural treasures in their original form. Siberia, comprising most of Russia's territory, is a vast wilderness of forests, tundra, and steppes stretching from the Urals to the Pacific. Lake Baikal, the world's deepest and oldest lake, contains 20% of Earth's fresh surface water and unique ecosystem found nowhere else. The Trans-Siberian Railway, spanning over 9,000 kilometers from Moscow to Vladivostok, is an epic journey through this immense landscape, one of the great railway journeys of the world. Russian Orthodox Christianity, after suppression during Soviet times, has experienced revival and again plays a significant role in national identity. The Russian Orthodox Church, with its elaborate liturgies, icon veneration, and emphasis on mystery and tradition provides spiritual foundation for many Russians and is closely tied to state power and Russian nationalism. Orthodox Easter and Christmas, celebrated according to the Julian calendar, are major holidays with traditional foods and rituals. The Russian educational system produces highly skilled workers, scientists, and mathematicians. Legacy of Soviet emphasis on technical education. Russian achievements in mathematics, physics, space technology, and chess demonstrate intellectual traditions that continue despite political and economic turmoil. Russians have won numerous Nobel Prizes in sciences and literature, and Russian hackers have gained notorious reputation for technical sophistication, whether working for state agencies or criminal enterprises. Russia today is a country at a crossroads, facing sanctions and international isolation while trying to maintain great power status, dealing with demographic decline and economic challenges dependent on energy exports, and navigating between authoritarian governance and population desires for prosperity and stability. The Russian people, who have survived so much throughout history, continue adapting to circumstances beyond their control while maintaining cultural traditions, strong family bonds, and identity as a great civilization with unique path distinct from both Europe and Asia. Understanding Russia requires appreciating its complexity, recognizing that Western categories often don't apply neatly, and acknowledging both the genuine achievements of Russian culture and the tragic costs of its political history.